Hello and welcome to this debate for Ward 3 Councillor. The two candidates here are Carolina Ventura, who's a practising attorney with over a decade of experience in advocacy and dispute resolution. The mother of two small children who will attend our public schools. Her priorities include smart, responsible growth, infrastructure and transportation, and critical services for residents. Julia Malakie has lived in West Newton most of her life. She's a graduate of Newton High. Not sure whether it's north or south, but
it was Newton High
back in the day. Just thought I'd check. And a graduate of MIT. She earned an MBA from the University of Chicago and is a photojournalist with the Lowell Sun. Julia is president of the Newton Tree Conservancy, an urban tree commission member, and a blogger. What is your top legislative priority and why?
I think the main issue for me is going to be the zoning redesign that's coming up next year that got postponed from this year because of all the big individual projects. Next year, as we heard in the prior debate, we're looking at citywide rezoning that would basically, from the planning department's perspective, their objective is to increase density all around the city. And I am concerned that many people in Newton are not yet aware of the implications. I found that even a year and a half ago when we were going through the stages with the pattern book and the things that led up to the zoning ward meetings. And I think it's going to be a great surprise to people when they become aware. And I want to make sure that the zoning that eventually gets enacted reflects what the people of Newton want.
Okay. Yes, Carolina.
For my part, I kind of agree. You can't be a councillor or knock on the doors or be a candidate in Ward 3 certainly, but also in Ward 2 and in Ward 1 without asking the question, what keeps you up at night? What are you thinking about? And the number one answer is development and zoning. I think it was a good idea and a proactive idea on the part of the city to start with a vision and to ask the community to come together and tell us, hey, what do you want? What do you think? And what do you want the city to look like so that we can get ahead of the developers? And now we've reached that point in the process, and the next point is really being concrete around the questions of zoning, and that's where the rubber hits the road, right? That's where we're going to be asking those specific questions around heights and setbacks and all of the things, but we're going to actually be getting to concrete. I think the councillor that represents Ward 3, the councillors that represent all of these wards are going to have to be very proactive in making sure that those questions get answered, the hard questions get answered, and that the interest of the community is really well served in that process.
Okay, so let's go to planning and development then, seeing you both expressed a concern and interest in that. And let's start with this. At approximately 5,000 people per square mile, Newton's population density is currently about 2/3 that of Boston, city of Boston. So do you support residential development that further increases Newton's population density? And if so, how much and why? Or put another way, Newton's population is currently about 90,000. What do you think would be an ideal population for Newton and why? So let's start with Carolina.
I don't think that is a question that you can answer with a number. At some point I'm sure that Newton's total population was 200 and now it's 90,000, and that's not an inherently negative thing. We're going to grow and we're going to develop. I think what's really crucial in that process, you can't really deny that we're going to grow and develop. What's really crucial is that we take the reins of that growth and that development as a community, and that we don't put our heads in the sand by kind of stepping away from the process and just saying, we're going to resist at every turn. We need to take the reins of that process and make sure that this is a tide that raises all boats, right? So we're improving our transportation, we're improving our services in our schools and to our seniors, we're improving our roads to make sure that that growth is responsible and that it's smart. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to harness it and make sure that it serves our community from an environmental perspective, and our goal, our North Star, should absolutely be to make our city more walkable and more accessible and more affordable than it currently is.
Julia?
Okay, I don't think there's anything smart about growing beyond our capacity to serve people and accommodate population and car trips and public transit capacity. It's interesting, I'm not sure the number you mentioned, but I guess it's about 90,000 people we're at now. The 2007 comprehensive plan predicted 88,810 at full build-out. So we're already past what the comprehensive plan predicted for full build-out. So if we continue on the path we are now, I don't know what the ceiling will be. We have the potential for growth even with existing zoning, and I think that would be preferred to trying to turn Newton into Cambridge or Somerville or Brookline, which many people I meet move to Newton to get away from.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Here's a question that may be a little more challenging because both of you are expressing an interest in joining the council, as it were, from outside. The Fuller administration is proposing a total rewrite of Newton's zoning code that would radically expand by right development throughout the city, including allowing multifamily homes on properties currently zoned single family and allowing apartment buildings by right in village centres. Do you support the administration's zoning proposals? Why or why not?
I would say largely I do not. I think the focus of zoning redesign should have been, and I hope it eventually will be, to satisfy some of the problems that were addressed or discussed a couple of years ago. We have the issue of tear downs. We have the issue of snout houses, all sorts of things that we were told, wait for zoning redesign. We can't do anything now. We can't have a moratorium on demolitions. We can't do anything because we are soon going to be redoing zoning altogether, and we can address those problems then. And what we have instead is a focus on increasing density. And it does, I went to the series of zoning ward meetings, and they initially started out with house sizes for a typical, sort of a typical Ward 3 type lot would have allowed, I think it was 2,000, basically you could have had a 4,000 square foot house on a typical lot. So it would have done nothing to disincentivize tear downs. They since have walked that back to a lesser maximum footprint times 2.5 stories in the not quite official second draft, I guess, but we have to wait and see what will actually come next year. But it seems to me that the whole focus of zoning redesign has been on accommodating more density and not on achieving the objectives that most residents would like to see, like preserving green spaces, preserving our smaller, relatively more affordable houses. Because Newton, we're too attractive a city in terms of our location to Boston and schools and other amenities to expect we're going to be, everybody's starter home. But it's something that people can aspire to and buy into Newton, maybe as their second house, if there are the types of the capes, the bungalows, the ranches that we've always had that are fast disappearing.
Okay, Carolina?
I think we all agree that our zoning needs rework. Absolutely. And some people put it a little bit more strongly and say that our zoning is a mess. I do think it's a misnomer to say that we're concentrating solely on density, that is necessarily an impossibility. The zoning code deals with a variety of different aspects around our space and our quality of life and our physicality as a city. I would agree. I don't think that any zoning should be 100% devoted to increasing density, but that's not the case. I do commend the city for its efforts to improve our zoning. And I really, at the end of the day, I really do think that the way that we zone around our city's future is really crucial. And we just all need to have a say in that. And I think the community absolutely does. And I think the city council or any councilor that's serving for that body really needs to listen to the needs of the community with a view towards making sure that the zoning is as appropriate as possible for our community. But I kind of want to push back a little bit on the idea that increasing density is the number one, all-encompassing goal.
Okay, let's turn to budget and finance matters. In 2007, Newton's Blue Ribbon Commission on the Municipal Budget recommended that Newton strengthen its commercial tax base, noting that commercial growth had been eclipsed by residential development. But since those findings were published, Newton's commercial tax base has further declined. Do you agree with the Blue Ribbon Commission that Newton needs a stronger commercial tax base? And if so, what policies would you support to achieve that goal? Caroline?
Absolutely. I do agree that Newton needs to improve and increase its commercial tax base. We get a lot more force and a lot more value out of commercial tax. The rate is much higher. I think some of the things that will improve that, and we all see this in our villages, right? Especially in places like West Newton, where a business will come in, they'll be there for a few weeks, a few months, and then they're gone. And you ask, well, why? Well, we couldn't stay afloat. And it's questions about rent, it's questions about customer base, right? And so one of the things that'll help is facilitating and encouraging the mixed-use commercial kind of concept, right? Is that those commercial spaces will be there. There will be more walkability. There'll be more customers walking around. Our village centers will be more vibrant, and that necessarily will contribute to the vibrancy of those businesses. And I don't want to pass up the opportunity to kind of express it. I think it's very important when we're thinking about those commercial spaces to be sure that our small businesses are also getting an opportunity to inhabit those spaces and to have success in this city as well. So that's one kind of mechanism that we can use to kind of increase and revitalize our commercial space here in Newton.
Mm-hmm. Julia?
I absolutely agree that we need to preserve our commercial tax base. I think one of the reasons that we see empty spaces in buildings is often because property owners have more of an incentive to wait for an offer from somebody like Robert Korf rather than to keep their spaces filled. And if the expectations of what the City Council would approve were lessened, then there would be less pressure on property owners to sell out. I'd also like to make the point that in terms of preserving commercial space, one example that came up in the prior debate was Rowe Street, which was a construction company business. It was purchased to be a housing development, but the city was able to invoke 1.5% defense against unwanted 40Bs. So I think it's very important to re-establish and reassert, which the current mayor is not doing, and lawyers think we should be doing, that Newton does meet the 1.5% land devoted to affordable housing that will enable us to avoid involuntary conversions of involuntary conversions of commercially zoned land to residential.
Okay. What about, just quickly, what do you both think of Proposition 2.5 overrides? Very brief question. Do you support them, not support them? Any views?
Actually, I agree with what Pam was basically saying in the last debate, where I am in favor of, and everything is subject to citywide elections, so the voters get to vote on whether it's debt exclusion or operating override. I think debt exclusions are preferred because they are, for a specific project, you know what you're getting, and there's it's time limited. When the bonds are paid off, the debt exclusion tax comes off your taxes.
Caroline, any thoughts?
I agree. At the end of the day, any override is going to be the ultimate decision of the voters. I think the role that the City Council has to play there and that the city in general and our elected officials have to play is to make sure that what is presented and the structure of what presented is what's appropriate. I do agree from kind of a logical perspective that the debt exclusion is easier to swallow for a lot of people because it's for a specific item rather than the operating. But I think at the end of the day, the key to that is transparency, right? Is that the voter knows what it's going towards. Because at the end of the day, the decision that you make at the ballot box is, is this worth it? Is this expenditure worth it? Is it going to improve my life? Is it going to improve the life of the city? Whether it's a debt exclusion or a capital or an operating. I just think, I'm open I'm open to it. I think there are going to be a lot of expenses and a lot of projects that we're going to need to fund, and we're already in the hole. But it really is going to come down to the transparency from the city council and making sure that the voter knows exactly what it is that they're buying.
Let's turn to the environment. And a fairly straightforward question. Do you support development that reduces the amount of green space in Newton? Now, specifically, do you support building the New Cal Senior and Community Centre in a city park? So let's start with you, Carolina.
No, I do not support the taking of green space for building. And specifically for Albemarle, I from the very beginning, from the time that project was proposed, I thought it doesn't fit any of the criteria that were laid out, right? Of being centrally located, being near public transportation, being near amenities, having ample parking. And so I didn't think that that particular location was appropriate. Having said that, I don't think anyone in the city would disagree that we need a new senior center. The one that we have is inadequate. So no, I do really believe in the preservation of green space, but I also believe in the fact that we need this new senior center. I think what is striking to me in the New Cal process is really the process and the transparency with which that all took place. I heard someone mention earlier, and it was absolutely true, that it seemed like the cart was before the horse. Mm-hmm. From the perspective of a lot of the community, the site, there were 145 sites, then there were 6, then there was 1. And by the time people were really focusing on it, they felt, like this was all going too quickly. I'm glad that we've taken a step back. And I think in the future we should learn from that, and we should realize that community input needs to be at the earliest possible operational point. And hopefully that's a lesson to be carried forward.
Right.
I absolutely would not vote to put New Cal, or I prefer to call it a new senior center, on a park. I think it's a mistake to treat parkland or recreation land as free just because the city owns it. And I think more needs to be done to look at other options, whether it's properties the city already owns, like the Crescent Street property, or land that, facilities that the city could potentially purchase, like the Armory. And I also think we should look at not necessarily a whole array of locations, but I think a city of the size could handle 2 locations. And if we acquired something like the Armory, or a closing church or something like that, and then renovated the existing senior center so we had, 2 locations, I think that would be quite reasonable. And also expanded hours for the existing senior center because they're not open on weekends or evenings.
Let's jump to any other thoughts that you have on what kind of specific concerns there may be for seniors in the city. What should the city be doing for seniors that you see could be achieved, or that may be part of a vision plan?
I think we should keep doing what we're doing at the current senior center. I haven't utilized it myself because I'm still working. I'm close to being 65, but not quite there yet. And so I don't have time to do it, but I know there are a great many trips and classes and activities. And, my late father, I took painting there years ago. I see many senior centers in my work as a photographer at the Lowell Sun, because we're always covering things there or doing features on people or things like that. So I see what an important resource they are to, it's like, college for seniors. And I have a new name for the senior center now, because I was at the Myrtle Baptist Church this morning, and they call their elder people seasoned saints. So I would actually like to call it the Seasoned Center, because the name New Cal just drives me up the wall. It sounds like a diet food.
Carolina?
I agree. I think the city does do a good job of addressing issues around seniors. We've already talked about the senior center. I think that's crucial. The city has services around transportation, which are only now starting, and I'm assuming, I really hope that they will evolve and become much more robust. And the city has services to help our seniors when they need help at home. I think, from my perspective, one thing that that we should keep in mind as we work on the council is to keep that constituency in mind in everything that we do. I've heard people say, well, we were considering the accessory apartment ordinance, and we were thinking about it as, well, this is a zoning thing and it's about what people do with their homes, and it turns out that there are a lot of seniors in the city who use an accessory apartment to make ends meet because they're on a fixed income and they just need that in order to be able to age in place. Or they have someone who helps them during the day. They have a grad student who lives there somehow, And I think all of those nooks, that population is affected in a lot of ways that sometimes is difficult to discern. And I think the council needs, for every single objective and every single ordinance, needs to be thinking about that particular constituency and making sure that we're doing what's right by them.
Okay, let's turn to affordable housing. Historically, housing developments with 50% or more affordable units were built in Newton in partnership with non-profit entities, including the Hamlet, Weeks House and Warren House. However, despite the availability of CPA funds, no such developments have been built in recent years, with all large projects being mostly market rate units. Do you support working with non-profits to build housing that is at least 50% affordable? Julia?
Yes, I think that's a much preferable option than settling for what we're getting from for-profit developers. And we actually lost an opportunity to have a 50% affordable project at Crescent Street because many of the so-called proponents of affordable housing on the city council basically sabotaged the effort and took it out of the capital improvement plan. That would have been 50% affordable units in an 8-unit project that would have added to park space. I think, and we also, the prior administrations of the city turned down an option to have, I believe it was 100% affordable housing at Austin Street, and instead took the project that we eventually got.
Carolina?
I agree. Here's what I think. I think that the issue of affordable housing is a complicated one, and no single tool is adequate. No single tool is adequate, right? We need to be creative and we need to be proactive about the solutions that we have. I do think that the nonprofit course is one way to address that issue, and I know that the economics are challenging, but I think we have the wherewithal and the innovation in Newton to make that a viable option. But I do think that there is a place for the affordable units that we get out of certain developments. When you consider, getting 125, 150 affordable units at a time, I think that's a great stride in increasing our affordable housing stock. So I don't think it's a zero-sum thing. I don't think it's an either-or thing. We need to be really diverse in our solutions because the problem is very diverse and the problem is very complicated. And I don't think just because we have a hammer doesn't make every problem a nail.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I was at a meeting, they were talking about the Armory, and one city councilor said, maybe it shouldn't be all affordable, if it's housing, it shouldn't be all affordable because, there's sort of a stigma to affordable housing. And Emily Norton said, there's no stigma to making 80% of area median income. And I agree with that point of view. My own salary in journalism, I think I might be making 50% of area median income. But I think anyone who's working is, respected. And, there shouldn't be anything, it's not like low-income housing. It's more affordable, but the people in them are just as good as the people who aren't in the so-called affordable housing.
Okay. Caroline, you want to say something quickly?
Yes, I'm not sure where, so I am someone who grew up not in a kind of, strapped situation, but in a very low income situation. I completely understand kind of from my perspective, there absolutely is no stigma, right, to being in any particular. I think our city is enriched by having a big spectrum on the issue of class. I absolutely do. And we need housing at every point of the spectrum. So I don't, when I say I think that we should take advantage of the affordable housing that comes from commercial development, that's not to the exclusion of kind of low-income housing that might occur at other sites. I absolutely do think that that's an absolutely crucial, and at least from my perspective, I speak for myself, but there isn't a stigma to it. It's a background of mine that I'm particularly proud of. Okay,
let's turn to the final question before your closing statements. And this is just to give the opportunity to ask a question to each other. So, Julie, would you like to pose a question to Carolina?
Okay. So do I need to move this a little? So a lot of people, including the planning department in the Washington Street Vision Plan, are proposing getting rid of the winter overnight parking ban at the same time that they're also proposing to let developers decide how much or how little parking to provide, and even eliminate minimum parking requirements for residential, for houses. Would you support getting rid of the winter overnight parking ban?
You know, parking, I think I stand with a couple of other candidates on the issue of parking. I do think there are some that believe that if there's no parking, there will be no cars, and I don't believe that. We folks drive, and I don't think that creating a situation where there's no parking is necessarily going to make it so that people don't drive, and it would just create a headache around it. I do think that we need to accommodate adequate parking when we think about things like the Washington Street Vision or any development that we're thinking about. NewCal, for example, right? The parking was a big part of that.
And on the winter ban?
On the winter ban
The winter overnight parking ban, getting rid of it or not?
What? I'm sorry.
Whether to get rid of the winter overnight parking ban, where you can't park your car more than 2 hours.
Well, I think that has to be something that we kind of look at holistically. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be in favor of it, no.
Great.
Okay, Carolina, do you want to ask, or can
Yes.
you ask a final question?
Yes. Sorry, I had to write it down. Would you describe your approach to problem solving in a group deliberative body like the City Council?
I guess I'm a questioner and a fact gatherer, and I think in a situation like the City Council, we're constrained by open meeting laws, so everything should be happening in public without a lot of serial conversations outside of the council. Basically, I think we need to find, I guess I would call it like the center of gravity on many controversial issues. And, you know, we've seen extended debates on things like leaf blowers and sidewalk shoveling ordinance, which took years to have an actual effective ordinance with an enforcement mechanism. So I think it's basically, you know, exchanging all the views, trying to represent it would be our Ward 3 residents, and making sure that residents are represented, even if it's, you know, even if it involves disagreements with other councillors.
Okay, well, let's go to closing statements from each of you. So if you don't mind, we'll go back to Carolina. Start with you, 30 seconds, closing statement, and then Julia.
So those of you who have been, it's been many hours, so those of you who have been here for a couple of debates have heard a few things a lot. You've heard a lot about negotiation. You've heard a lot about balancing interests. And I think if you talk to any sitting councilor, they would tell you, if you told them what are the two things that you would put at the top of your job description, it would be, I balance interests that are competing, that are legitimate, and I negotiate with my colleagues, with developers, you name it. And that's what I bring to the table. I negotiate for a day job. I'm an attorney. A lot of what I do is dispute resolution and sitting down across from someone and finding common ground in a situation that's contentious, in a situation where the stakes are very high. And then also what I do is find consensus and common ground around difficult issues. But I also negotiate. I'm an attorney, and when I walk in a room, I have a client. And it's my job to advocate zealously for that client and to push really, really, really hard for them. But at the end of the day, is it in their interest if we don't arrive at a deal? No. And that's what I bring to the table. And people ask me, well, what are your qualifications? What would you add to the council? Is that I'm a zealous, smart, hard-nosed negotiator, but at the same time I approach it from a perspective of consensus building and common ground fighting and finding. And I think anyone who's been sitting here today, all of these questions around the environment, traffic, development, our schools, the answer to every single one is balance and zealous advocacy for our constituents. And that is the number one thing that I bring to the table, and it's something that I do really, really well every single day.
Thanks, Carolina. Okay, Julia.
Okay, what I bring is my background of over 50 years living in Newton. I've run twice before. I've spent several years immersed in what's going on in the city and trying to help residents become better informed about what is going on and what's likely to happen. I had another inspiring, statement from the Myrtle Baptist Church this morning, where the kids, the children's conversation was all about having people's back. And the advice was, be the kind of person who has someone else's back. And I guess that's the way I feel about representing Ward 3 and West Newton. I want to have West Newton's back.
Okay, thank you very much. And that concludes our Ward 3 councillors'